Hello, good afternoon. This is Gary Officer, President and CEO of the Center for Workforce Inclusion. Today's event was scheduled around Older Americans Month for us to celebrate and discuss the challenges that older Americans face in trying to re-engage in a workforce that has changed around them. Today's event was intended to include congressional participants who unfortunately we could not schedule because of a variety of scheduling conflicts. And instead, we have put together a panel of two wonderful leaders in the workforce and civil rights community. I've asked Mr. Joe Carbone, an incredible leader from Connecticut. He is a servant leader extraordinaire who has, for many decades, delivered extraordinary programming, cutting edge training for workers of all ages who are seeking to find their way back into the American workforce. And I'm pleased Joe is here to join us for this conversation. I've also invited, thank you, Joe. I've also invited Mr. Mark Mouriel, President and CEO of the National Urban League. Mark is one of our nation's most important civil rights leaders. The National Urban League is one of our most iconic civil rights organizations. And you'll always find Mark, whether it's on the front lines of protesting against police brutality or pressing our presidents in the White House to ensure that our nation's true promise is delivered for all of our citizens. Mark will join us in about 15 minutes. And this panel today will be moderated by Terry Owens. Terry is a media veteran with 17 years of experience as an anchor and a reporter in Baltimore, San Francisco, and Detroit. He has given us his time today to help move this conversation along and to give the listening public the best possible experience as we present today's show. So thank you all, and I hand you over to my friend and colleague, Mr. Terry Owens.
Gary, thank you so much for that very kind introduction. I really appreciate it. I've always admired the work that you do and the work of the panelists today as I learn more about them. And I look forward to really what I hope will be an insightful conversation. And to the folks watching, I want to reiterate that this is intended to be a conversation. We want to get you involved. And to join the conversation, you can do so in two ways. You can select the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to write in your question, or you can select the hand raise function at the bottom of the screen to join the queue to speak directly to our panel. When your name is called, just hit the unmute button that pops up to speak. Well, as an older American, I'm delighted to be participating in an event that celebrates the more mature among us, but is also shedding some light on the challenges that so many are facing as they try and re-enter the workforce in the wake of a pandemic. We've got a distinguished panel, as you've heard, and not a lot of time, so let's jump right in. Gentlemen, this first question is for the both of you. What do you think is the single biggest challenge to an equitable and inclusive recovery post-pandemic, particularly for older workers? And Joe, why don't you get us started by giving us your perspective from the workplace?
I think that we're going to take some lessons of things that have happened during the pandemic that are going to become part of the way that commerce operates, the way that HR functions are administered. I think a lot of it's going to be that older workers who have records of being reliable, being protectors of things like proprietary info, that they're going to take on a greater value here. But in order to make that value really meaningful, it means that elderly people or older people need to be tech savvy. I think that part of the bias that people 50 years of age or older face, anyone who's not been through the change of employment probably doesn't realize it, but if at any point from age 50 on you need to change your job, you're going to have a disappointing kind of an experience in terms of not getting callbacks or not getting interviews. The perception is that if you're 50 or older, you're not as tech savvy as those who are younger. You may be watching the clock, looking towards retirement. Your healthcare cost may be greater. So you got to compensate it with other value. And your value is your record as an employee, your ability to be relied upon, but you got to have knowledge of technology. Whatever you might have missed in those younger days. A lot of folks come through our programs, they haven't looked for a job in 30 years. And it's a different way of looking for a job today than it was 30 years ago. You got to be tech savvy. I think one of the great experiences that we had through our program here, CSEP, is that we bought a couple of hundred iPads and Chrome. And as a result of it, a lot of folks who did not have much experience at that learned. And when they learned, they protected themselves and their job. And in many ways, they've opened the potential for a great, great future. The next step is up to us to take them to what that better place is. And we're ready for it.
Sounds good. And we're going to talk about the kind of conversation we need to be having with employers to be open to that possibility. But Gary, let me tweak the question just a bit more for you. If you could have the perfect outcome, what does success look like on the other end of a pandemic and the end of a movement, really, to put older, low-income job seekers to work?
Thank you, Terry, very much. And thank you, Joe, for your opening comment there. I think this issue goes way beyond simply how to get a job. We have to draw a line from public expenditure through cultural change, through to helping people transition back into the workforce. Let me explain that in 3 parts. This country invests 0.35% of GDP on workforce investment. We would rank 10th of 11th among the Asian economies. We rank just above Mexico among the OECD nations, advanced economies, for workforce investment. So my question then is, do we want to compete with Mexico? Or do we want to compete with Germany and the Asian economies? And this is why, during the pandemic last year, the US unemployment numbers increased from about 3% in March to 22% by the second week of May. In that very same period in Germany, unemployment increased from 3% to 5%. And in Singapore, it did not move at all. Right? So, because they were continually investing in strategies to keep their workforce able and adept and adapting to a seismic and sometimes existential threat that may change the way we live and work and function. We don't do that. So while other economies were able to work their way through, we shut down, we suffered, we created. And now we're talking about building an equitable recovery where everyone, regardless of age or race, will benefit from what the economy can then renew itself to being once more. And yet today, the Department of Labor released its latest unemployment numbers, 6.1% unemployment nationally, 10% unemployment for African Americans, 40% more than the national average. So even while trying to emerge from this pandemic, that taught us many lessons about human suffering, about the change in the nature of work, we're beginning to see the same old trends reemerge. So my conclusion is one, we have to invest significantly more resources into workforce investment, and we have to do so at a significantly higher level than the Federal Senior Community Service Employment Program, or CSEP. It's currently funded at around $450 million. This should be a $2.5 to $3 billion program.
Given this, I'm sorry, Gary. I was just going to say, in many respects, we're preaching to the choir today. I understand
Yes.
most of the participants are employees of your respective organizations, people who work in the field, sister agencies. What can the folk who are on this call today do to influence those kinds of policy decisions at the city, at the state, and at the federal level to convince them that the kind of resources you're talking about are solid investments?
Well, as you know, Terry, we're not political organizations. We are 501c3 public purpose charitable organizations. So our responsibility is to educate our federal, state, and local legislators, educate them on the merits of engaging older workers in the workforce based on the basic value proposition that they are productive. And that if they remain in the workforce, they are just as technologically adept at being able to manage in a world that's more technologically dependent than any other population. So I think the responsibility locally is to continue to educate and tell the story and to advance the essential motivation of older workers. And why is this important? By 2024, older Americans 55 and up will become the largest single segment of the US workforce. Joe knows that, and Mark knows that too. And it's the African American community that's most affected. There's a data I read here recently that said African Americans were about 45% more likely to be unemployed than white Americans, based on the nature of their jobs. And it goes back to my earlier point, we have to invest significantly in workforce investment, one. Two, culture. In many cultures around the world, to be older and to be somewhat gray-haired is a matter of honor. It generates respect. People will engage with you. In this country, we have an anti-aging culture. It's reflected in how we look at resumes. It's reflected in how we engage folks at a water cooler. And so adopting the habits of the Asian community, right, where you embrace aging, you find ways to include folks who are older in important decision-making. That's important. So investment, culture, and then change. And change gets us to what Joe just said.
Well, these comments are already sparking lots of interesting questions from our audience, and I'm not going to waste any time getting to them. Andrew Smith asked, as an employer, what would be the best way to recruit mature workforce? Until the majority embrace newer tech, what's currently the most impactful way? Joe, how would you respond to that?
I would say that number one, that you should certainly contact the local operator for Csep. Csep employees work. They're learning, they're working, they're assisting a not-for-profit in their community. But check them out. I mean, we need to move people from Csep into private sector employment within a relatively short time, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. They're ready for those jobs. That is a recruiting pad that I think that employers should turn to first. And just as important, I mean, I agree with everything that my colleague Gary said, but another reason for continued growth in the spending level for Csep is that it's kind of like a breeding ground. You've got thousands of people that are there. They have something to do. They're getting some wage gain from it. They're getting experience. They've got the interaction with other people. You know what happens when people are unemployed for a long period of time? They lose it. They lose the connection to working. The mind becomes a problem. I see Mark is here, and Mark came to my office in Bridgeport just a few years ago to meet with the long-term unemployed. It was that period of a year, 2 years of unemployment made them unemployable, a lot of them. So to the extent that money is put into Csep, and they're kept active, they're busy, they're interacting with other people, they're learning that technology is growing in the importance. It gives us a chance to focus on them and to better train them, better skill them. So this breeding ground approach is very important. Every time we increase the budget for the national operators to bring more people into this program, that's a better quality workforce for the future. So that's another way to do it.
All right, and we've been joined by Mark Mouriel from the Urban League. Sir, good to see you.
Hi, Terry. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
I'm fantastic. And let me just, first of all, apologize for arriving a little late this morning. I was coming from another meeting in Midtown Manhattan, but I appreciate the chance to be with everyone today. And Joe and Gary are certainly incredible advocates for seasoned Americans, older Americans, and we all work very closely on the program that everyone's been referencing, the Csep program. And we cannot forget what Gary just shared, and that is the demographic shift taking place in the nation. And the fact that the nation will need the older American to be able to work, the older American to be able to fill employment opportunities in order to grow the economy going forward. We just got the jobs numbers for this month, and they're lower than the estimates at 266,000. But I'm confident that with the new stimulus dollars and with the gradual reopening of the economy, that employment is going to pick up. And I'm encouraging employers, and we all have to encourage employers, look to the older Americans. Come to all of us that run seniors and community service and employment programs, better known as Csep. We can help you identify experienced, mature Americans to work in your business. It's just such a reservoir of talent and ability that should not go overlooked by employers as this economy comes back. So I wanted to just offer that as we recognize, this day and this time. And I just appreciate the chance to be with everyone this morning. Again, at the National Urban League, we've been a Csep provider since 1978. And we now operate in approximately 6 to 7 communities across the nation. We serve predominantly African-American seniors. And this is one of our favorite programs. And this is a program that we're always going to fight for more resources and more from the Congress and from the president.
Well, clearly there is no one size fits all solution for the challenges that each of your respective organizations are facing. So Mark, talk a bit then about the difference that Csep can make for that Ninth Ward resident struggling to get back on his or her feet.
Well, thanks for the question. I like the idea that we create through Csep a community of mutual support amongst the seniors that we serve. And that's an important dynamic, that we're not just serving an individual with services. Secondly, the idea of being able to identify short-term employment opportunities that pay a stipend, on-the-job work experience, community-based work experiences is also an important part of this program, because for seniors, it's also sometimes not only a desire to work, but a desire to work in a purposeful opportunity. Sometimes these assignments with nonprofits create that. And then I think thirdly, for that senior who wants to be in the workforce, you connect with an organization that can provide you with services, connection with employers, assistance in a job search, assistance in how you present yourself for a job or job interview. And I believe that we owe, as a nation, to our seasoned citizens, to our older Americans, dignity, respect, and opportunity.
Joe, talk about some of the underlying issues that most of us take for granted when it comes to older workers who find themselves outside the workplace. Issues like shame and guilt and all those things that can really hamper their ability to get back into the workforce.
It's the issue really of bias. It's hard to understand it and believe it, but when we get older, there is in the employment community a sense that you begin to look at issues that you don't look at when they're younger. I cannot tell you the number of people who have gone through the process of actually applying for a job, going for interviews, even after they've had telephone interviews. A lot of employers don't ask in the application, they can't how old you are. So by the time they get there for the interview and they're prepared for it, they're ready. Sometimes the interview will last for a minute, 2 minutes, because they'll finally recognize their age. So there is a bias. And in an economy that's always in this sort of state of flux of change, that's where technology does come in. That's where education comes in. That's where the things occur that create this bias based upon age. So there's a lot of things that older people can do to get prepared for that. And really the best way is to be as dynamic as possible during those interviews, and for themselves to not view aging as a liability, but to go in there charged to convince an interview person that there's a value to my age. I bring something that my competitors who are younger can't. And it's experience, it is knowledge, and it's loyalty to the employer. But you got to measure up. You got to be ready. You've got to have the high-tech knowledge. You got to be able to learn. You've got to certainly have the skills to communicate. This is why when people lose contact with the flow of commerce, with the way in which business operates, what the definition of competition really is, they lose a lot. So periods of isolation, like you just went through as an example, those are years that are set back. So it's important. A program like Csep, as an example, fills that gap. It doesn't let you get stale. It doesn't let you lose contact. It makes sure you've got this community of folks around you. You're doing something positive, but they're there to help if you need.
So I can add to that. You've offered a wonderful analysis of the value proposition that Csep provides those that it serves. But in truth, the total number of people we serve is meager, right, compared to the need that exists in our society.
Yes.
The funding level for Csep is nothing but a rounded error within the Department of Labor's workforce budget. So we have two issues that we have to really get our heads around. One, how do we ensure that we can serve as many people as possible, given the needs that we have recognized and articulated, and the future dependency of the US workforce on older workers? That's one. Two, how can we ensure that the Csep federal allocation that's appropriated each year is commensurate with the demand for the program, which we both know is simply not there? That's the challenge of our time. I also believe that, I mean, you've heard me before privately, Joe, that I function on there's a time, there's a place, and there's an opportunity. With this administration, we have a window of opportunity for the midterm to make that big, bold ask that we're seeing in our communities. The sheer volume of people now multiplied by COVID-19 and other issues that suggest that this program has to increase its funding. And collectively, the National Urban League, the Workplace, the Center for Workforce Inclusion, and many other nationals who are on this call today stand at the ready, right, to expand our programming, to identify more people, and then to work with the employment sector to get more people back into the workforce. Yeah. That, to me, is the biggest challenge of our time. I think we have an opportunity to move on that.
We do, and what Gary is just saying is so right. It said before we're 501c3, so we can't get political, but this is not political.
That's right.
This is to grow this program because we appreciate the value.
That's
and
right.
We appreciate its need at the moment, especially at the moment. I think we had been through 4 years where the previous administration when it came to their budget, struck out the CSEP program, just a blanket out. In fact, their first budget was just a few days after the former president took office.
Yeah.
And without any thinking, without any study, it was just X'd out of the budget. And that's the pattern that did continue. I think we have a new day. And I think our ability to work together to make the case that this breeding ground that we call CSEP, it needs to go from what it is today, 50 or 55,000 people. It needs to go far beyond that to keep its community growth.
We were struck out by the previous administration, but we fought back.
Yeah, we did.
We fought back. We didn't allow for those budget decisions to then create this assumption that somehow we have to eliminate the program from our organizations. We combined forces, we educated our lawmakers, and the program didn't just survive. We were able to extract increases in funding that we never thought possible. And that's the power of the collective. Each of these organizations were able to come together for that common purpose.
And I'm proud that in 3 of those years, a senator from Connecticut, Chris Murphy, kind of led the charge to make sure that that money went back in the budget. And now Rosa DeLauro, who's a member of Congress for 30 plus years, is chair of the budget committee. And she covers part of my district and part of another district in Connecticut. But I live in New Haven where she is, so she's my congresswoman as well. She loves CSEP, understands it, she gets it. She's a good friend of Mark's, by the way, as well. And so I'm looking confidently, not just at the continued funding of CSEP, but this is that time, that period where we've got to accept nothing but growth and a lot of growth here. And the numbers that we can deliver into the economy of people ready for the challenge are huge.
And the story about
CSEP question.
And I want to add something that Gary and Joe have just emphasized. It was through Gary and Joe's great energy and leadership that we fought back, that we stood up, and we've got to continue to stand up to make the case for increased investments in CSEP, to make the case for increased investments in employment services support for older Americans. And so where everyone comes in is we can't be silent in this moment and in this era. And because we stood up, members heard us.
That's right.
Members of Congress heard us. Members of Congress with whom we had personal relationships took up the mantle and took up the fight. And it's important in this moment that we understand that by fighting for the integrity and the funding of a program, we're not being partisan.
That's right.
We're not being political. We are simply being smart, and we're being advocates for what communities need. This program historically had support all across the board. I still think it does have support across the board, but let's be honest, we've got to call the question with members to say, and I don't think it's well understood, Gary, that older Americans are an increasingly larger portion of the workforce. I mean, if we simply look at the most recent census data and look at the increased number of people who are aging in America versus the new births, it tells a very important story. Plus, people are living longer. People can live longer. People can be vital much more longer. So we've got a job to do to educate people, policymakers and influencers about the value proposition of what older Americans bring to the table.
Our audience is chomping at the bit to get into this conversation, and I'd be remiss if I did not let them in. Olga's got her hand up. Olga, you want to bring yourself up?
Absolutely. So good, where are we? Afternoon, folks. And thank you for this very important conversation. I couldn't agree more with you. First of all, just to introduce myself, I'm the state director for Csep in Massachusetts, and I've been directing the program for the past 12 years. So it's been through a lot. I started the program in 2009, early 2009, with Obama administration, and here we are now. Same story. The program is always on the chopping block. It infuriates me as the person who needs to do budget and other boring things like that. But what's really critical, I think, the times they're changing now, and we really need to hear the voice of our participants. And I think we have a unique opportunity with COVID being all virtual and our folks being primarily virtual, to give them a voice they've never had before. To give them Zoom or whatever you guys like to use. Being the state employee, I don't have Zoom. I have WebEx, which older workers can't use because it's very clunky. So, but that's okay. I know how to work around the system. But we really need to build the community in such a way that our program participants are heard daily. So whatever it is, people use tweet, let's get them accustomed to using social media. They're all on Facebook looking at the pictures of their grandchildren anyway, right? So
yeah, we've run the kids off Facebook. The Facebook is now the platform for older folks. Olga, thank you so much for your thoughts. We're up on time and we've got a lot of people with their hands up. Let me see.
Thank you.
Great conversation. Thank you.
Some other folks in here. Andrew Smith asked about a community of mutual support is a great idea. Also hard to get organizations on board with the idea for some reason. How do we follow through?
That's a good question. And I want to respond to that because the workforce development community functions as silos. When I first came over here from the housing world, you had a common interest. The interest was building housing to be purchased or rented, right? And you combine forces on the political side to ensure that the resources came in to support your mission, your purpose, and your goals. We have a system here where you have the career one-stops, the community colleges, but you have the national organizations who run this very small rounded error program called Csep. And too often, none of these groups are talking to each other. We all have our separate networks, separate goals, separate relationships. And I think what we need to begin to think about is what it means to be part of a community. What does a community look like? Who are the stakeholders? Who are the players? And where do we fit on a continuum of need where each of us can share resources to ensure that the needs of the total community can be served? That's not what I've seen in the workforce community. And Joe, if you have any take on that, I'd like to hear that.
Yeah, I don't think the workforce community, when I say that, the community of folks that are providing training and other things, I don't think they've worked as hard as they should have over the years in terms of protecting this population. But now may be that moment. One of the things I wanted to raise is the future of telework. That was something that was not, it's not as if it's a brand new exercise, it's not, but it was never really looked at the same way as it is now. It was untested. And most employers didn't want to cross the bridge and test it. They did it only when they had to. Well, this time they had to for a year or more, and I think they've learned something. There are a lot of folks that don't need to get into public transportation or to use their car or whatever to get to work every day. That can work just as well, just as much real productivity working from home. So that tool will help populations who have long faced really multiple barriers to success in employment. Certainly people with disabilities, and a good number of people on the Csep program have disabilities. So I think the test that we have and that I want to be judged on was not just to protect the program and to grow it, but to somehow develop that tool internally where teleworks can be made into a credential that can kind of state their fitness. And it's another way that we can take them to employment. This,
That's very-
sometimes from a crisis like
Joe,
this,
Joe,
That's
something
very
good
good.
happens.
Joe,
very
you talked about the implicit bias that older workers face to begin with. You talk about the value of telework. I think I saw a piece in the Post this morning where head of a large organization was saying that they're ready for their people to come back to the office despite the value we've seen through teleworking. What's the conversation that we need to be having with employers right now while we're at the same time advocating for more resources in Washington?
Yeah, I mean, I heard the same report that you just alluded to, and I don't buy it, honestly. I think employers are looking at the question. There is a cost to a cubicle, to a desk, to a tech connection, a phone connection. There's a cost to bringing people together under one roof. There's a benefit, but there's a cost. Business people, employers that are serious about their work, especially those on the for-profit side, you have to evaluate that. It's not cheap to have that cubicle. It's not cheap to do these things. And there will be an equation, a science of sort that will be developed that can put some degree of balance. Say what's best for us. So I think it's going to be a lot more prevalent than the story that we both read earlier today. I think the commercial real estate market is up for some major challenges, but let's kind of seize that moment and take advantage of it, because we could make something real out of this. I mentioned before people with disabilities, and a large percentage of our people have one or more of them. This could be a game changer, but we have to learn about it. We have to in some way find a way to have a national credential created around it. And it becomes another tool for moving people into private sector employment. And that's the ultimate goal here.
That's right.
Gary, you were trying to get in.
Yeah, I was agreeing with my colleague, Joe, but I think it goes back to my earlier statement. We have to have a robust public investment in workforce development. I cannot say that more. We have to use the COVID pandemic as a time of both reflection and a time for culture change. And the culture change will then inform how organizations and practitioners adapt their strategies to engage the community and employers so that older Americans are both skilled, prepared, and ready for opportunities within a workforce environment that is welcoming and will support them. And that those three legs of that stool, I think, are all interdependent on one another. Because I go back to the last 12 months, and the stories Joe heard, I'm sure Mark heard them too, of families who were suffering, folks who were concerned about what was going to happen to them because of the pandemic and the closing of the economy and its resultant impact on their income. We've seen employers take a different look at what it means to have a company that has employees that they are dependent on, and now have to figure out how they can then reintegrate them into a world that's changing around.
But I also think that it's important to note here, I mean, we had a very bad 4 years in a row, but the most recent stimulus bill and the one before that didn't change it for CSUN, right? There was not growth in the program. It did not manifest itself in a way that I thought. I was going back to the days of era about 12 years ago with the recession that occurred then, where there was some additional money put into the program. There was not this time. Money for most else, but not anything significant here.
And that's really a failure on our part for years of neglect in not making the case so that we could be heard when the time is right. But now is our time, Joe. And to the listening audience, this is all about timing. When African Americans are 45 times more likely to be unemployed than white Americans as of this day. When older women are 38% more likely to be unemployed from 1 month to the next. That's telling you something. And when the economy in 2 years' time is going to be dependent on an older workforce, right? we have to create the resources to skill our workforce for an environment that's changing and changing at a rapid pace. And at the same time, we have to engineer this cultural reassessment of how we treat people who are older. Because as you know, Joe, to be old in this culture is not the most welcoming thing to experience, right?
Well,
to be mature.
So are we looking solely to the public sector for that kind of resource and support, or is there a role for the private sector to play here?
That's a good question. I think there's twofold. This is one of my real issues. Philanthropy in this country invests 1% of their funding, 1% of the total assets of our national philanthropic community goes towards programs serving older people. Less than 2% of the total philanthropy grant-making budget that's supported by a $600 billion industry. Less than 2% funds workforce development. So it isn't just government. This has to be embraced by the philanthropy community, the moral leader in this space. And then we have to pressure our corporations to invest more and to ensure that they are using their hiring methods, not to exclude, but to include a broader base of potential hires. And that's the challenge we face. Joe, I cut you off there and say so.
Well, that's okay. I think that the marketing side of this is very important. The largest voting bloc in this country are people 50 and older.
That's right.
My friend Mark here has run for public office before. You know what? We're not political. We can't lobby. I'm not going to hesitate to tell members of Congress that good number of people in their district are 50 years of age or older, and we cannot be taken lightly.
Hey, Joe, 50 is the new 30, 60 is the new 40, 70 is the new 50.
You got it.
I mean, age is not what it once was. We have a president pushing 80. The previous president was 70 plus. The last two presidents are the oldest presidents in modern American history. It's such a different thing. When we think about older Americans, it's so important to think about the vitality and the energy and the experience and what they bring to the table. Gary said something really resonated with me, and that is, in our culture, I sort of have always looked up and worshiped and honored elders. And I think we have to recognize that it's important to understand that many of the people who are becoming older Americans are baby boomers. And baby boomers we're a transformative generation that was on the front lines of so much of the social and economic change that took place in the 20th century. So we have got to, American companies have to invest in. I have seen, in the early 14, 15, 16 range, I did see more older Americans working in certain types of jobs that I traditionally saw much younger people working. That's a healthy sign. That's a positive sign. And what we've got to do is educate business America, employer America about the vitality and the skills that the people we serve, who are older Americans, seasoned, I call it seasoned citizens, bring to the table.
You know what? For those who mentioned before about the gray hair, there are ways of taking care of that too, right?
For those who still have hair, Joe.
Yes.
There are ways of doing that. I recall one of our PD, one of our platform to employment persons once said, "It's the color of my hair that's causing the problem." I said, "Well, that's the easiest one to solve."
So if we know what works for the Center for Workforce Inclusion, we know that the Workplace and the Urban League are all great examples of programs that are working. while you're hamstrung in some senses about your ability to make your case in Washington, we've got to be able to make this case because it's being recognized. I'm here just outside Washington, D.C., in a small community where a small group has recognized that, and they're reaching out to older Americans and saying, you guys still have plenty of value left, and let us help you figure out ways to re-engage. So you're right, there's something stirring, but how do we bring it to the fore in a way so that we can develop the kind of momentum that it's going to take to really make this an issue that our elected officials wake up and pay attention to?
Let me start with that and say that we have to make the case. We have to tell the story. We have to describe the folks that we're targeting for this program. They've got to see their lives and see the conditions that they're facing. They've got to understand that you've got this pool of bias, of prejudice, of discrimination that folks face simply because of their age. I agree with Mark. 50 years of age today, you're not old at 50. You almost hate to say that and put people who are within that age bracket in that group. I think we've got to make that case on the political side to members of Congress in terms of the strength of older voters at the ballot box. To businesses, they will gravitate to that sector of our population when it's to their advantage. So making it to their advantage, it's not a matter of altruism. It's a matter of making it a market-driven approach, that it's better for them. It is financially better for them, and their output will be better. So we have to be political, we have to be practical, and we've got to have some good ideas that can make this a market-driven program, not altruistic.
Well, Gary, I've been a bad moderator. I've allowed us to run over a few minutes here on our allotted time. I'll defer to you at this point as to how you want to proceed.
Well, if my colleagues want to continue for the next 5 or 10 minutes, if they have the time, I would encourage us to continue.
I do.
Let's do it.
So pick up on
I'm
that.
gonna have to excuse myself to hop on another Zoom, but appreciate the chance to be with everyone today. Thank you.
Mark, thank you for
Mark.
coming.
Appreciate it.
Always.
So we had a couple of questions that we have not gotten to. Here's one from Charles Norris Brown, who asked, as a CSEP participant, agree to the tech and agree to the usual reaction when they see you on a screen. A big challenge is also how to show employers about the exact nature of contributions that can come from older people. And I think, Joe, you've been hitting on that point.
Yeah, I think I covered that if you want me to.
Yeah, no. Let's see. Pamela Silvestri asked, often we're older, we're put in a position to have to overcome our age, maybe even the modern application, the interview processes not in our favor, other issues, accepting jobs with lower pay. I agree then with Gary about the change in culture is needed. What can we do about these issues? Gary?
That's a big question, and culture takes time to shift. As Joe said in his earlier statement, it's going to require us to be persistent. We cannot give up. We have to be resilient. We have to keep believing in ourselves. We have to work our informal networks, our family networks, you name it, former colleagues. I will say this, don't give up. I've seen and heard some remarkable stories around this country of folks who almost gave up. And but for a chance encounter with this program, they would have given up. And now they're back on their feet, they are thriving, they're happy, and their communities are benefiting from them. So my statement is don't give up, but we owe it to everyone on this call that we have to do the best we can to inform the American public and our employers about the positive contributions that older workers can bring into the workplace.
Joe, your program is being replicated in states across the country. What's the secret sauce and what will you share with us? The
program is called Platform to Employment. We created it during the great the Great Recession. And the secret sauce is clear. The program begins with 5 weeks of classes every day, and it's all about the mind. It's kind of the restoration of really the self-confidence that a person might have lost, dealing with some of the emotional challenges that come with long-term unemployment. But the program takes risk away from the employer. It recognizes that people need a first step. So you don't go to an employer and ask to make the hire. You arrange a time in which could be for 4 weeks, could be for 8 weeks, where their wages are covered fully, but covered by me at the workplace. 95% of the time, the employer makes the hire. 95% of the time. Now, that in and of itself will tell you that altruism is not that. That we got here is a market-driven approach. We need to do more and more of that in the future. So our program, Platform for Employment, I hope will spread nationwide.
You guys have incredibly dedicated and talented staffs. They work with folk who are going through extremely difficult circumstances. How do you keep your folks motivated so that they can inspire these others who in many cases have lost hope?
I think in our case, I've been sharing we share a lot of stories about the participants that we serve. We've had these national town hall meetings where our folks can listen to our clients describe what it's been like for them the last 12 months. We've heard some heartwarming stories, some sad stories, and also some hopeful stories. I think the connectedness of institution to the people that we serve in their communities. When you are in this game, that's an essential bond. And the reinforcement of that bond informs our purpose and it keeps people motivated. So that's what we've done in the last few months to try and keep folks focused on what we are really here to do.
I have almost 200 employees, and we have a presence in 8 or 9 different states. You can hire the best and the brightest, and we try to do that. But the quality that I look for are people that are on a campaign of life to do something, to leave a mark, to leave a legacy that they can live with and they can be proud of. I look for passion. I look for people that don't sleep nights because of injustices, and they want to be part of a campaign to correct it. To hire people like that, yeah, you need to reinforce the dream, but they're folks that are on a mission, and they're going to give this job all the love that they can and all the work that it takes to try to help others achieve the America promised to all, which may be promised, but it's not delivered.
Well, on that note, I think that's a good place to wrap this conversation. Gentlemen, thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this celebration of older Americans. I applaud you for the work you're doing with and through Csep, and I hope that I can in some small way be a part of helping to raise the profile around this program and help you to help older Americans.
And Terry, if I could just make one comment, as one of the, I think it's 17 national operators, I can tell you that the presence of my friend here, Gary, in the last 3 or 4 years has been quite remarkable. He has brought the operators together. He has helped us really define the mission and define the argument and get to our members of Congress. He has been really a godsend. He's a great friend, but he's done so much in such a short period of time. A good part of my optimism for the future is because of Gary. So Gary, thank you.
You're too kind, Joe. I appreciate you, my friend.
It's all true.
Gary, final thoughts?
I'm always hopeful. I think the next 12 months offers us a unique opportunity to really redefine what this program could become. We have a president and an administration that's prepared to spend. We want to make sure that their spending priorities reflect the needs of a segment of the workforce that we cannot ignore. And if we can work together, if we can coalesce our strategies around resources, around engaging our public officials, and build a national movement around this just cause, I believe we can be successful. So CSEP has to grow, but the nation's attention to the needs of our older workforce will have to be there for us to grow this program successfully and deliver positive societal and economic outcomes. I'm hopeful, Terry.
Good. Well, thank you. We had upwards of 150 people participating in the discussion today, and always excited to see when people are engaged. That says you all are doing a great job in leading your teams and people who are committed to the mission. So thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of today.
Thank you very much, Terry, my friend. Stay in touch.